Good evening. Tonight, the major breakthrough in a cold case after a Flint teenager's homicide went unsolved for decades. But now the family of Sherry Jo Elliott finally has answers as to what happened to their loved one. Her body was found in a rural Saginaw County ditch in November of 1983. And Terry, how did police eventually identify a suspect?
Well, Angie, using a DNA analysis and forensic genetic genealogy, police were able to identify a potential suspect in the murder and sexual assault of 16-year-old Sherry Jo Elliott. The suspect did not voluntarily give up a DNA sample, but then he took his own life.
It was 2025, and somewhere in Grand Blanc, Michigan, a 75-year-old man received a visit he had been dreading for 43 years. Cold case detectives standing at his door. He didn't answer it. Instead, within weeks, he was dead. But before he died, he thought he had won. He thought 43 years of silence meant the secret was his forever. He thought the girl he left in a ditch on a rural road in Saginaw County, 20 miles from where he found her, had been forgotten. He thought time had done its job. He was wrong. Because somewhere in a laboratory in the Woodlands, Texas, scientists were extracting profile from biological evidence that had been sitting in a storage room since 1983. 43 years old, degraded, faded by decades of time, still enough. To unearth what this man tried to bury, we have to go back. Back to a cold November morning. Back to a 16-year-old girl named Sherry Jo Elliott. Back to a bus stop at the corner of West Dartmouth and Clio Roads in Flint, Michigan. 6:30 a.m., November 16, 1983. The bus came, it stopped, it waited. She never got on. For 43 years, no one knew why. Her mother waited. Her aunt held on to a memory of a teenager walking through a door, arms open, saying, "Hi, Aunt Judy," not knowing it would be the last time. Her stepfather spent the rest of his life searching for a name. He died without one, but the detectives? They never stopped. And what they uncovered, 4 decades later, is one of the most haunting cold case resolutions in Michigan history. And this is Reopened Records. Stay with me. If you're new here, welcome, and I mean that genuinely. This channel exists because stories like Sherry Jo's deserve more than a footnote. They deserve to be told fully, carefully, and with the weight they carry. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button right now. We put out new cases every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming now. Let's go back to Flint. In 1983, Flint, Michigan was a city holding its breath. It hadn't always been this way. For decades, Flint had been one of the beating hearts of American industry, a city built on steel, on General Motors, on the kind of blue-collar pride that doesn't ask for recognition because it doesn't need it. People came to Flint to work. They came to build something. And for a long time, the city delivered on that promise. But by 1983, the promise was cracking. Factory closures had begun to ripple through the city like a slow tremor. Unemployment was climbing. Families who had spent generations in Flint were packing up and leaving, chasing work to other states, other cities, other possibilities. The neighborhoods that had once been loud with children and block parties and the smell of someone's grandmother cooking on a Sunday afternoon were going quiet. Lots sat empty, buildings sat abandoned. The population was shrinking, and the people who stayed, they stayed because Flint was home, because their roots went too deep to pull up, because leaving felt like surrendering to something they refused to name. Sherry Jo Elliott was a product of that resilience. Born in Charlotte, Michigan, she had grown up in Flint. She attended Flint Carmen High School, navigating the hallways and the homework and the ordinary social drama of being a teenager in a city that was fighting to hold itself together. She lived on Seneca Street with her mother, Joyce, and her stepfather, Robert Schultz. She was known, she was loved. She was not, in any definition of the word, a stranger in her own community. Her aunt, Judy Siaka, would later describe her the way you only describe someone when grief has made the memory sacred. She could still see Sherry Jo walking through the door, could still feel the hug, could still hear the words, "Hi, Aunt Judy," casual and warm and completely unremarkable in the way that only the last moments of something ever are. Judy carried that image for 43 years, a teenager walking through a door, arms open, alive. That was Sherry Jo Elliott, not a case number, not a cold file, a girl who hugged her aunt and said hi and meant it. The morning of November 16, 1983 was a typical Flint November morning, which is to say it was cold, it was dark, and it started before the sun did. Sherry Jo got dressed, moved through her morning routine, and left her home on Seneca Street to begin the walk to her bus stop at West Dartmouth and Clio Roads. It was 6:30 in the morning, the kind of morning where your breath fogs in front of you and the streetlights are still the brightest thing on the block. She knew that route. She had walked it before. It wasn't a long walk, it wasn't unfamiliar, and in the way that teenagers in every era move through the world, she moved through it without suspicion. Because why would she be suspicious? This was her neighborhood. These were her streets. She made it to the bus stop. The bus came, and Sherry Jo Elliott did not get on it. What happened in those minutes, between the moment she arrived at that corner and the moment she didn't board the bus, is a question that took 43 years to answer. But whatever it was, whoever approached her, whatever words were exchanged, it happened fast enough that nobody noticed. In a city already distracted by its own survival, on a dark November morning when most people were just trying to get warm, something terrible happened at a bus stop, and the world kept moving. That afternoon, when Sherry Jo didn't come home from school, Joyce felt it before she understood it. That particular dread that lives in the chest. The one that parents know and pray they never have reason to feel. She made calls, she reached out to Judy. And then the family did what families do in those first desperate hours. They moved. They searched. They refused to sit still. Drop in the comments right now. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? I always love knowing who's in the room for stories like this one. The community response was immediate. Flyers went up in store windows. Neighbors passed paper copies hand to hand, block by block. In a city that was already carrying the weight of economic decline, people found the energy to search for a missing girl because that is what communities do when one of their own disappears. Judy described those days with a clarity that 4 decades could not soften. It was terrible, she said. We went and passed missing signs to everybody in the neighborhood and in town, and stores would put them in the windows. For 4 days, Sherry Jo Elliott was missing. 4 days is a strange kind of time when someone you love is gone. It is long enough to feel the hope beginning to thin at the edges, but not long enough to fully accept what the thinning means. Every phone call could be the one that brings her home. Every knock on the door could be her. The family searched and prayed and searched some more, and the whole neighborhood held its breath with them. Because in a community that size, a missing 16-year-old girl is not an abstraction. She's somebody's daughter, somebody's classmate, somebody's niece who walks through the door and says hi. Parents who had previously let their kids walk to school started driving them. The geography of daily life contracted overnight. The invisible lines that communities draw around what feels safe, those lines moved inward, tighter, closer to home. Because if it could happen to Sherry Jo, it could happen to anyone. And everyone in Flint understood that. On November 20, 1983, 4 days after Sherry Jo disappeared, a muskrat hunter was moving along a rural road in Bloomfield Township, Saginaw County, when he found her. She was in a ditch, 20 miles from the bus stop where she was last seen. 20 miles. Think about that for a moment. 20 miles is not a walk. It is not a wander. Deliberate, purposeful, chosen. Whoever took Sherry Jo Elliott did not act on impulse and leave. They took her somewhere, and then they drove 20 miles to leave her somewhere else. That distance tells a story even before the medical examiner's report does. And the medical examiner's report was devastating. Sherry Jo had been sexually assaulted. She had been shot 4 times. The bullets had entered from behind, which meant that in her final moments, she had been trying to get away. She had been running, or positioned as though she had tried to run, and she had been shot in the back. 4 times. She had fought. The evidence made that clear. She had not gone quietly, and she had not stopped trying. And it hadn't been enough, and that is the part of this story that sits in your chest like a stone and doesn't move. The evidence collected at the scene was meticulous. Law enforcement documented everything, catalogued it, preserved it, stored it. Biological evidence was collected from the scene, sealed, and entered into the chain of custody. In 1983, nobody knew what that biological evidence would one day be capable of telling them. DNA forensics as a mainstream investigative tool was still years away. But someone, somewhere in that investigation, made the decision to preserve what they had. And that decision, made by people whose names we may never know, in a case that would go cold for 4 decades, is the reason this story has an ending. The Michigan State Police and local law enforcement threw themselves into the investigation in the weeks that followed. They pursued every lead they had. They developed persons of interest. They followed the trails that 1983 forensics could give them, and those trails told them that a man had done this. A specific man, whose biological material was now sitting in an evidence bag, but it could not tell them his name. There was no DNA database to run a profile against. There was no genealogical technology to build family trees from genetic data. There was a biological fingerprint pointing directly at a killer and nowhere to point it. The case went cold. Not because investigators gave up, not because anyone decided Sherry Jo didn't matter. The case went cold because the tools required to solve it had not yet been invented. The science that would eventually name her killer was still being developed in laboratories that didn't know yet what they were building. And so the file was closed, not permanently, never permanently, and Sherry Jo's evidence was stored away, waiting for a future that was still being written. And Ronnie Collins went home. Ronnie Collins was born on February 9, 1950, which made him 33 years old on the morning that Sherry Jo Elliott never came home from the bus stop. He lived in Grand Blanc, 15 miles from Flint, close enough to know the streets, close enough to be unremarkable at a bus stop on a November morning, close enough that his presence in Flint would raise no flags, draw no stares, prompt no questions. He was a traveling musician, and that detail, that specific, almost cinematic detail, matters more than it might initially seem. A traveling musician moves. That is the nature of the life. You play a gig in one city, you pack up, you drive to the next one. You are seen in places where you are not a regular. Your presence is explained by your lifestyle. Your mobility is your alibi before anyone even asks for one. Ronnie Collins could have been at that bus stop on a Wednesday morning and been 40 miles away by Thursday afternoon, and nobody would have thought twice about it. That kind of anonymity, the kind that comes from a life lived in motion, is extraordinarily useful to someone with something to hide. And so he hid. For 1 year, for 20 years, for 30. He kept living, he moved through the world. He woke up every morning in Grand Blanc, Michigan, 15 miles from the city where he had taken the life of a 16-year-old girl, and he kept going. He ate meals, he played music, he existed. And every year that passed without a knock on his door must have felt, in whatever part of himself he allowed to feel things, like confirmation that he had gotten away with it. Meanwhile, Joyce waited. Aunt Judy held onto a doorway and a hug and 3 words. "Hi, Aunt Judy," because that was all she had left, and she held onto it the way you hold onto something when you know it's the last of something irreplaceable. And Robert Schultz, Sherry Jo's stepfather, he carried it too. He carried it through every year that passed without an answer, through every birthday that came and went, through every November 16th that arrived and reminded him of the morning a 16-year-old girl left his house and never came back. He carried it until his body gave out, until he got sick, until he died, 1 year before the announcement that would have given him the name he spent his entire life trying to find. Robert Schultz never heard the name Ronnie Collins. He died not knowing. Let that land for a moment, because I need you to feel the full weight of that. A man spent his entire life, waiting for an answer that arrived 11 months after he was gone. His family had to receive that answer without him. And the man responsible for all of it? He was still alive. He was 75 years old, and he was still alive, and Robert Schultz was not. That is what 43 years of injustice looks like. Not just one loss, a cascade of them. If this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me right now, share it. Put it on somebody's timeline. Send it to someone who needs to hear Sherry Jo's name tonight. These stories only travel as far as the people who carry them. Share this video, let's carry it together. In 2023, the Michigan State Police 3rd District Cold Case Unit made a decision. They pulled Sherry Jo Elliott's file, a case that had been sitting untouched for years, and they reopened it. The decision was driven by something that had been quietly transforming cold case investigations across the country: forensic genetic genealogy. The technology that allows investigators to extract DNA profiles from degraded biological evidence, run those profiles through ancestry databases, build family trees from the results, and work backward, generation by generation, until they arrive at a name. In 2023, that technology existed, and the Michigan State Police intended to use it. What made this reopening different from previous reviews wasn't just the technology. It was a partnership. An unusual, remarkable, genuinely hopeful partnership with the Western Michigan University Cold Case Program, a student-run investigative assistance program that works directly alongside Michigan State Police detectives on exactly these kinds of cases. Before any student touched a single document, they underwent rigorous background checks and confidentiality training. These were not hobbyists. These were students who took the work seriously enough to submit to the same standards as professional investigators. And then they got to work. What they found when they opened those boxes was 40 years of accumulated investigative material. Paper files, handwritten notes from 1983, photographs, witness statements, decades of documentation that existed only in physical form, sitting in filing boxes, unsearchable and uncross-referenceable. The students reorganized it, they digitized it. They converted paper into searchable digital documents, turning a haystack into something that investigators could actually navigate. This work, the organizational work, the digitization, the patient hours of converting the analog past into a searchable present gave the investigators a clean foundation. A place to stand, a way to see the whole case at once instead of piece by piece. And from that foundation they moved forward. The preserved biological evidence from the 1983 crime scene was submitted to Orthram Labs in the Woodlands, Texas. Orthram specializes in forensic-grade genome sequencing, specifically in working with biological evidence that has degraded over years, over decades, over conditions that would make lesser science give up. They extracted a comprehensive EST profile of an unknown male from the Elliott evidence, a genetic blueprint, incomplete by the standards of fresh evidence, but complete enough for what came next. That profile was run through ancestry databases, relatives were identified, family trees were constructed and extended and cross-referenced. The genealogical work moved backward through generations, parent to grandparent to great-grandparent, and then forward again, narrowing the field of possible individuals with each branch of the tree. This is painstaking work. It is the kind of work that requires both scientific precision and investigative instinct, and it takes time. But it works. In case after case across the country, forensic genetic genealogy does what 40 years of traditional investigation could not. It worked here too. The search narrowed, and then it narrowed further. And then, from an ancestry database, from family trees built by people who had uploaded their DNA without knowing their relative's secret, from the accumulated genetic data of thousands of ordinary people doing ordinary things, the name emerged. Ronnie Collins, Grand Blanc, Michigan, 15 miles from Flint, 75 years old, still alive. An unmarked vehicle, a residential street. Investigators approaching a front door. Investigators moved carefully. This is the part of a cold case investigation where everything has to be precise, because you only get one chance to approach a suspect without tipping them off, and if you tip them off, if they run, if they destroy evidence, if they lawyer up before you've secured what you need, the case can fracture. They needed a DNA sample from Collins to confirm what the genealogical evidence was pointing toward. A voluntary sample. A simple swab that would either confirm the match or eliminate him from consideration. They went to his door. He declined. He did not provide the sample. And in that refusal, in that single act of a 75-year-old man saying no to a simple cheek swab, there is a story within the story. Because innocent people don't typically refuse DNA samples in cold case investigations. Innocent people cooperate. Innocent people say, take whatever you need, because they have nothing to lose. The refusal itself was not evidence. But it was something. It was the behavior of a man who knew exactly why those detectives were standing on his porch. Investigators moved to obtain a court order. The legal machinery of the justice system began to turn, slowly and deliberately, toward Ronnie Collins. And then, before it could reach him, in January 2026, Ronnie Collins died by suicide. He chose death over accountability. He chose to end his life rather than sit in a room and answer for what he had done to a 16-year-old girl at a bus stop 43 years ago. And in doing so, he robbed Joyce Schultz of a trial. He robbed the family of a courtroom. He robbed Sherry Jo of the public reckoning that she deserved. The moment where a jury looks at the evidence and a verdict is read, and the world officially acknowledges what happened to her. One last act of control. Even in death, he tried to have the final word. But here is what Ronnie Collins did not understand, or perhaps understood and simply couldn't stop. Investigators did not stop when he died. A DNA sample was obtained from his remains during the post-mortem process. The sample was analyzed. It was compared, marker by marker, to the biological evidence recovered from Sherry Jo's body in 1983. 43-year-old evidence, collected by investigators who couldn't have known that the tools to use it were still decades away, preserved by people who made the right call without knowing why it would matter. The match was conclusive. On April 13, 2026, 42 years, 4 months, and 28 days after, Sherry Jo Elliott walked to the corner of West Dartmouth and Clio Roads in Flint, Michigan, and never came home. The Michigan State Police made an announcement. Ronnie Collins was the man who had killed her. Hit the like button right now if you believe Sherry Jo deserved better, because she did. And so does every family sitting somewhere tonight, still waiting for a phone call, still holding on to a memory of someone they love walking through a door for the last time. Joyce Schultz was at home when she received the call. She heard it, she processed it, and then she did the thing that people do when something enormous lands on them. She called her sister. She called Judy. Judy's reaction was raw. It felt that 43 years of waiting produces rawness. Not polished, not measured, real. I couldn't believe it, she said. It was like, you've got to be kidding me. They actually found the person that killed her. Joyce's response was something more layered, something that only a mother who has carried a grief like this for 43 years could arrive at. She confirmed that the DNA had proven it, that Collins had done it. And then she said something that I think deserves to be heard exactly as she said it. I am glad he is dead. But I am still processing all of this. I want to sit with those two sentences for a moment, because they contain more truth about grief and justice and the limits of both than most people could express in a lifetime. She is glad he is dead. That is not a complicated feeling when you know what he did to her daughter. That is honest. That is human. But she is still processing, because the answer, when it finally comes after 43 years, does not arrive neatly. It does not resolve everything. It changes the shape of the grief, but it does not end it. There is no trial. There is no verdict read aloud in a courtroom. There is no moment where Ronnie Collins sits in front of her and has to look at her and hear what his actions did to her family. He stole that from her too, and Robert Schultz, her husband, Sherry Jo's stepfather, who spent his entire life carrying this. He died the year before the announcement. He was supposed to be in that room when the phone rang. He was supposed to hear the name. He wasn't there. He will never be there. And that absence, that particular shape of the loss, is something the family will carry forward alongside whatever relief the identification brings. There are questions in this case that died with Ronnie Collins, and they deserve to be named even if they can never be answered. Did Sherry Jo know him? Her family doesn't believe she would have gotten into a car with a complete stranger. She was a 16-year-old girl, and 16-year-old girls, especially in 1983, in a city that had already taught its residents to be cautious, don't typically get into cars with people they don't know, which raises the question of whether Ronnie Collins and Sherry Jo Elliott had crossed paths before that morning, whether he was someone she recognized, someone who seemed safe because she'd seen him before, at a venue where he played, in a neighborhood he passed through, in some ordinary context that gave him the appearance of being someone she could trust. We don't know. We will never know. Did anyone in Collins' life suspect? He was a traveling musician. He moved through communities, through cities, through the lives of people who knew him in one context and not in others. Did he ever say something? Did someone close to him ever notice something that didn't add up? Did he carry this completely alone for 43 years? Or was there someone who held a piece of it without fully understanding what it meant? We don't know that either. What we do know is this: the Western Michigan University students who sat at those tables and digitized those files, they were not alive in 1983. Some of them were not alive in 1993. They came to this case with fresh eyes and modern tools and a commitment to doing right by a girl they would never meet, and they helped close it. Justice in the Sherry Jo Elliott case literally spanned generations. It required people who weren't born yet to help deliver an answer to a family that had been waiting their entire adult lives. That is not a small thing, that is remarkable. And the investigators who preserved that biological evidence in 1983, who catalogued it and stored it and maintained the chain of custody through decades of personnel changes and storage moves and departmental shifts, they made the right call without knowing why it would matter. They preserved the future of this case when the present had nothing more to offer. That is the kind of decision that doesn't get celebrated at the time, and maybe never gets celebrated at all. But it is why we are here. It is why Ronnie Collins has a name attached to what he did. November 16, 2026, will mark 43 years since Sherry Jo Elliott left her home on Seneca Street in Flint, Michigan. She was 16 years old. She got dressed that morning. She kissed her mum. She walked out into the cold November dark toward a bus stop she had walked to before, on streets she knew, in a city she called home. She never came back. Her stepfather had never heard the name. Her mother waited 43 years for a phone call. Her aunt has held a doorway memory for longer than some people live. A teenager walking through, arms open, "Hi, Aunt Judy," and now she finally knows why it stopped. Ronnie Collins is dead. He will face no trial, no courtroom, no verdict. He made sure of that. But he did not make sure of everything. He could not stop the science. He could not outlast the detectives. He could not survive the moment when those investigators knocked on his door, because that knock, that sound, told him what he had spent 43 years hoping would never come. They knew. And now we all do. Her name was Sherry Jo Elliott. She was born in Charlotte, Michigan. She grew up in Flint. She went to Flint Carmen High School. She hugged her aunt and said hi and meant it. She was a teenager in a city holding itself together by sheer determination, and she was part of that determination, part of that community, part of the fabric of ordinary life that makes a neighborhood a neighborhood. She deserved to grow up. She deserved Everything that comes after 16, 17, 25, 40, all of it. She deserved to be the one making phone calls, not the reason for them. This case is closed now. But closure and healing are not the same thing, and Joyce Schultz said it best. She is still processing. She will probably always be processing, and that is okay. That is human. That is what happens when you love someone and someone takes them from you. And the answer arrives 43 years too late and brings no trial with it and leaves you sitting with a name that can never look you in the eye and account for itself. What we can do, all of us sitting here together on this side of the screen, is say her name, remember it, tell someone else. Make sure that Sherry Jo Elliott is not just a cold case file that got closed. Make sure she is a person who is remembered. That is why this channel exists. That is why we do this. If her story moved you, if you've been with me this whole time and you feel the weight of what 43 years of waiting does to a family, subscribe right now. New cases go up every week, and every single one of them is a person who deserves to be more than a forgotten file. Subscribe, drop a comment, tell me what you think. Do you believe justice was truly served here? Collins is dead, the DNA matched, the case is closed, but is that justice? Or is justice something that requires a courtroom, a verdict, a moment of public accountability? Tell me what you think. I read every comment, and I'll see you on the next one.